here, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. And what about if they have questions at the end?
So they should be able to hear.
Yeah.
This is basically the microphone right here. So it's working.
Okay, this is pretty neat.
I would move here.
We're good.
You ready to
We have enough power.
Yep. We got it.
We're good? Okay.
Right. Yeah. You want to try
Okay, everybody.
Thank you.
Those of you in the World Wide Web, I may not give you direct attention, but I know that you're there. And I was told that if you had questions at the end, we'll do a Q&A that you can ask them then. Okay. Thank you so much I heard that there was a lot of interest in green burial and that this was something that was asked for. It is something so deeply rooted into my love, love for the earth, but also love for caring for each other. And green burial is part of caring for each other. It is an ecologically more sound practice to go back to. So I'm going to dim the lights so that we can start the presentation. My name is Kathleen Rouleau. I am a hospice nurse as well, and I have been what they consider now coined phrase a death doula or a death midwife for over 30 years, starting when I was under the age of 18 with a family, and then just kind of progressed with actually doing this work with then friends. And then eventually becoming a hospice nurse as the next logical step for me to being able to provide, a really good foundation for the people that I would be helping, and their families. Forever grateful. The giving back what was so freely given to us is, again, a part of the premise of my personal belief. Everything that ever was and will ever be comes from the soil. Who we are comes from the soil. What you eat. Like you are, the same calcium that's in your bones is the same calcium that's in the whale's bones, that's in spinach. It's all just one big depository, that we keep, coming from. All of us. All of us. My agenda, obviously, to define what a green burial is, and then some of the myths about green burial, the differences between what we now call conventional burial, as well as, more sustainably friendly, what is now coined as green burial or natural burial. And then we'll do a Q&A. And for those of you who are here, I did bring a shroud so that there could be, some demonstration, because it's something that most people have never seen unless it's part of your personal religion, Islamic or Jewish. They do continue to use these particular practices. Pretty much everything that's in this presentation has come from either the Green Burial Council website. I love the Order of a Good Death. It's a mortician. She is absolutely amazing. Look her up. She has amazing YouTube videos. She is fabulous. Green Burial Massachusetts, as well as talkdeath.com. And apparently this is recorded so that if you don't screenshot this or don't write fast enough, you will have access to this again to watch the presentation another time. So, what's a green burial? Green burial, as defined by the Green Burial Council, is caring for the dead with a minimal environmental impact. It also aids in the conservation of natural resources, the land and habitat, and the reduction of carbon emissions. Natural burial, for the most part, was the American norm. When you think about, the wagon trains going out west, like, you were deposited right where you died. They dug a hole or they put stones over you, and you were allowed to return from whence you came. Now, obviously, we all know of like the Egyptians and mummification. There are lots of different practices that have been used around the world and in different cultures. The Egyptians, even though they're most well known for mummification, are not the only ones who mummified. Tibetans, for instance, as well as the Toraja people of Indonesia. And the Toraja people of Indonesia continue to mummify, and they have certain practices that have been, recorded for, centuries, but probably thousands of years that these practices have, continued. They used to have a special tea that they would use, certain plants and herbs. Their, modification, modernization, and some of them are starting to use formaldehyde-based embalming, but that's not typical. It's typical that they use their own practices that they have for centuries. So one of the questions I get asked is, well, then how did we come to the practices that we have today? One of the reasons is because of the Civil War. Prior to the Civil War, you were living on a farm, you were buried on the farm. There was usually cemeteries that were family, just family cemeteries, on the farms. But the Civil War changed all of that. In the Civil War, our men were dying so far away from home. There was no way to logistically, it could take weeks, even months to even find somebody. And then to bring them home, again, even if you knew where they were, you had someone right there, weeks to get somebody home. And it was not a viable option, but they wanted to bury their dead. That's something that we have, from about 300,000-year-old burial sites have been documented and found. This is intrinsic to our souls, to honor our loved ones. So during the Civil War, some medical doctors started kind of playing around with, how we could do this, how to preserve the body. So there was some, obviously, for, hundreds of years, we have been dealing with the medical field and saving bodies and preserving them. And, so what happened that changed everything, blossoming into this, was President Lincoln. When President Lincoln died, his body was, had traveled across the U.S. in a train. And it was because they embalmed his body, and they had embalmers on the train to continuously keep, pumping the chemicals into him so that he looked, really well. And people saw that embalming worked. And it was like, fabulous. This is wonderful. Of course, the most compassionate response that we could have was to do this for our families and our communities, bring our loved ones home who were dying in other states so that they could be properly buried and honored. So truly, embalming started as a compassionate response to what was going on at the time. For modern cemetery practices that we know of today. Metal wood, hardwood caskets, embalming fluid, concrete liners, and then of course increased carbon footprint because, okay, I want the best I remember this conversation when my grandmother died and the funeral director was like, don't you want the best for your mother? Of course we do. Well then, this hardwood or redwood or metal hermetically sealed casket is going to keep her preserved. And you're just like, oh yes, of course we want this, And in that moment, of course we would want that. Of course we would. We loved completely for all eternity. And that is really what was, being the strings within us that were being, plucked, or the things that our love is eternal. And of course, we would want the best for our loved ones. Not considering the fact that we would not think about the environmental impact, because that was never on any of our minds. Not once. When I was raised, was the environmental impact of our practices even discussed. Now, in the climate that we are living in, literally, climate change, an understanding of the devastation to our waters, to our oceans, just the mere fact of having to harvest the hardwood. So now you have the carbon footprint of the tractors and the trucks, and then the workmen and their cars, and then you're getting this hardwood from anywhere around the world, and now it's going on a boat and it's being delivered. It's like the carbon footprint just keeps exploding, and we have no idea, what we were doing. All we knew was that we loved this person so much. We want the best. That's all we were thinking. Now that we know better, we're starting to do better. Just you're asking for this is a sign to me that this is exactly what's happening. We want to do better. And to me, doing better is being more environmentally conscious, which brings us to the green burial cemetery characteristics. Foregoing toxic embalming. No vaults, which are the concrete liners that we put the caskets in. And choosing easy biodegradable containers. That could be made from wicker, it could be made from seagrass, it could be made from so many other renewable resources, bamboo, for instance. There is other parts to this that I like to also kind of like put out there, is that there is something called, what do they call it? Like greenwashing. They call it greenwashing, right? So they say, oh, well, there's an environmentally friendly green embalming. While it may not have formaldehyde, it certainly has a lot of other chemicals in it. I just like to plug that in because people need to be aware, that happens in every industry. The environmental costs of the modern practices. When I first read this, I was floored. It was unbelievable. 1 million acres of land devoted to burials in America. Now, that in and of itself, if it's a green burial, that is now land that in perpetuity is saved from, well, hopefully, because laws change, from future development, but the amount of embalming fluid, 1.2 Olympic swimming pools of embalming fluid every year going into our groundwater, eventually, even though they're in a hermetically sealed casket, eventually that does crack open, and eventually the concrete vault cracks, and this goes into our water system. The steel caskets, 2,000 Empire State Buildings annually is unbelievable. The amount of resources that we are using mildly unconsciously, right? Because we weren't thinking about the environmental impact. All we're thinking about is love. One of the things that I just learned from someone on the Green Burial Council was that concrete itself, making concrete, has a really high carbon footprint. 4 to 8% of all carbon emissions comes from making concrete. It's unbelievable. And then, of course, the cost. Financial burdening of our loved ones. My auntie went hook, line, and sinker in for that funeral director. And at the end of it all, it was something like $38,000 That's almost like a quinceañera, it's like, they're pretty amazing, right? But that burden was then on everyone in the family and then some. Now, a green burial and a home funeral together, right? Significantly less. However, again, depending, some people are choosing, Mount Auburn Cemetery has a green burial section now. It's absolutely amazing that they're getting with the times and they're understanding. So those numbers would not be for someone who is going to Mount Auburn Cemetery, but it gives you a general idea of the significant difference as the economic burden that this can be on families. One of the things that I love to teach about is that embalming is not required by law in any state. However, there are some states that require you embalm to have a dead body leave the state, Alabama being one of them. There is also some statistics that are saying certain diseases, a person would be better off being embalmed for the safety of the general public. But that being said, there's no law in any state that says you have to do it. And when using embalming fluids, this is the other thing that floored me. 13% higher death rate with embalmers. 8 times higher contracting leukemia. The diseases are not even all listed here. ALS, neurological diseases. These are actually known facts for embalmers being exposed to embalming fluid on the daily. It's something that if we thought about and we knew this kind of impact that it was having, I think we would take a moment to think about, do we really need this? Do you need it? And for some reasons, like I had stated, if you're bringing someone back from Europe, they died unexpectedly on vacation. There are reasons why, but it's not always necessary. I was raised to believe that cremation was a green option. And as much as I'd like to think that it is better for the environment than embalming, in a metal casket, it's a real toss-up. So during the cremation process, not only, is the emissions astronomical, there is to date, no filtration system that we have, at a crematorium that can take out all the particulates that will be pollutants in the air. Mercury being the most well-known. And one of the other things, the amount of gas that it takes. Again, the resources that we have that are limited. So I'm not too sure if some of you have seen this picture of the body, the capsula mundi, where they show a body in fetal position inside of this egg pod, and then a baby tree is planted over it. And that the premise is that as the pod itself, which is actually made out of biodegradable plastic, as it slowly starts to degrade, that the person's body inside, slowly leaks out and goes back into the life cycle, which seems like it's like, well, that's wonderful, because as we do decompose, that is exactly what's happening. We're being brought back into the life cycle of the earth, giving back what was so freely given to us. Every time you eat, you are gifted from that soil the life that you have that sustains us. So giving back so that we can continue to sustain the future lives. Unfortunately, they have not been able to successfully do any studies that prove that this particular, body container is viable or any better, than just putting you in the ground, as a green burial with the tree over you or near you, which would have the same effect, but without the additional cost, of actually buying the pod. Another one that I was really hopeful for, and I love the idea, which is cryogenic freezing. Unfortunately, the company that was doing research on this did close down because they were unable to prove the viability of this particular mode of body disposition. And then my other favorite when it came out was the mushroom suit. I was so excited. I don't know if any of you know the guy named Paul Stamets. He is an amazing man, and he is all about mushrooms and the mycelium and its intricate position, within the health of the earth. So I was excited about that. Unfortunately, they had a field test, for the mushroom suit. And there were other concerns, environmental concerns, such as introducing a lab-made mushroom, into an environment where it wasn't a part of, and the DNA may have been different. And as we know, all life affects all life. So introducing new DNA really could have had, unknown consequences in the future. So that was kind of out. The next one that people really love is memorial reefs, which as a person who's all our lives depend on the water and the health of our oceans. All of our life depends on the water and the health of our oceans. And people who are a little bit more like our surfers or people who like to sail, like they realize, that our reefs are dying at an astronomical rate. And for lots of different reasons, microplastics, pollution, algae blooms that have to do with fertilizer runoffs into rivers that then go into the ocean. And it just kind of snowballs. It snowballs. And it is killing our oceans. So people are like, oh, well, let's, use the cremains, which in and of itself, if you put cremains into the ocean unmitigated, its high pH level does damage the ocean. But if you put it in concrete and inoculate it with, sea creatures that would grow, then it would absolutely, and it does become a reef all on its own. So there's more futuristic 50 years from now, 100 years from now, research needs to be done to really kind of see it. But for right now, going from the least, sustainable and friendly, to the best, going down the list, it is actually pretty good in the middle. Then we have the funeral pyre, which most of us, know the same thing as on the Ganges River. They just, burn the bodies instead of like a crematorium, just an open air fire, with wood underneath. And there's one place in the US that allows this, but you must be a resident, to do it. So even though it's supposedly slightly better as far as resources, it's not using the gas at the high rate that it needs to. It's a half a quart of wood typically is all that's needed, to properly, dispose of a body. It's still not, like great as far as I personally believe. And then natural organic reduction, which is the human composting, which has been in the news a lot lately. There are 7 states right now that allow it, Washington being the first. And then there are 12 states that have had bills introduced so that they could bring, this as an option, a viable option for people who, don't have a green burial near them, but want, or they want to do it specifically because they want to bring their person back to their family land, but they don't have a family cemetery. There are strict laws as to who can have a burial on personal property. Like there are rules on how much property you have and its adjacentness to water sources and things of that nature. So people who do want that, this is a great option, for them. However, speaking on my personal belief system here, it is still energy intensive. So not only do you need resources such as alfalfa, wood chips, but then you also need energy, although it could be, solar powered, possibly, although most of them are not. It still takes, energy to heat it up because that is part of the process. You know what I mean? So that's still using resources that we don't have to if we allow the earth and her wisdom to do what she's always done and is capable of doing. Just letting her do her thing. Right. So why is green burial, difficult? Trick is to find a cemetery near you that will allow you to have a green burial. It's legal in all states, and I'm sorry, apparently I didn't look at my PowerPoint presentation, so y'all are missing a few words, so I apologize for that. It is 100% legal in all states to have a green burial, but the trick is to find a green cemetery. So there are different things that people can do, such as the group that I belong to, which is Peaceful Passage at Home. We have an advocacy group, and one of the women that is a part of our consortium, I guess, she goes to municipal towns and goes through the process, which could take a year, up to a year, to get a municipal town to take green burial as a viable option, but one that, people want, right? Because there is some labor intensiveness to changing bylaws and, going through the process of like, what are the mechanics? What does it involve? What do we have? What are our resources? So it does take some time. But there are people out there who are advocating for us to have this as an option. So, again, the cemetery requirements themselves. While there are no laws advising us on what we can't do, they also don't tell us what we can do either. So like most people in lawmaking positions, language is so important because it can be, switched and changed depending on your personal interpretation. So they basically leave it up to every cemetery to decide for themselves, which is great if there are people who can advocate, for the local community members, such as Mount Auburn, which is exactly what happened. People advocated, for Mount Auburn to open this up as something that not only do people want, but as a gift, which is exactly what Mount Auburn, that was built on. A gift for the future. So Judaism, Islamic are the two most well-known, that in every state they have their own cemeteries, which is again backing up that it is not illegal to have a green burial. You don't need a vault, you don't need a casket, you don't need to be embalmed. Mount Auburn Cemetery listed, I found out Westview Cemetery in Lexington now has a green burial, as well as the gardens in West Roxbury. There is other lists of, more, but they are unfortunately few and far between at this time. But it is becoming, a rally cry for environmentalists, to say like, no, like not only do we not need this, it's not a law, but it's also damaging to our environment and to the workers. So it's not, the embalmers have like the worst of it because they're like up close and personal with it, but it's like everyone that handles the body as well. Like they're being exposed. The rising interest. In 2008, 43% of people said they were interested in learning about green burial or wanting a green burial. It is now, a whopping 84% of people are like, yeah, what is this? How is this a gift to the future generation? And I think that's another thing that people keep realizing is that it is a gift to give to yourself in the way that you're giving it to your future generations, so that your children, your daughters, your sons, your great grandsons have less of an environmental cleanup that they have to work with because of our choices. And they're just unconscious choices. We go to default, automatic default. You do what your family has always done. Well, you want to honor your family. I respect that. And the things that we've always done, we learn new things. We learn repercussions that they weren't aware of because there wasn't statistics then. But there are now. And we'll get into the fears and the myths of green burial. I mean, the first time I was talking to someone, she's like, "There's no way I'm letting you bury Dad in a backyard." And I was like, yeah, no, it's not, it's like, well, we could if you had a family cemetery that's already, established by the government, but no, we're not just digging a hole and putting them in the backyard, right? But it's like that, people think that, right? But there's lots of other things they think about, such as you see on the movies, animals digging up bodies and like taking off with, half an arm or something, right? Like I don't know if you've seen the movie, but I have. So not only has there not been any documented cases in any green burial cemetery in the US, there's also scientific evidence to the 3 feet below ground smell barrier. So not only are they 3 feet under, which puts them in the most viable position in the earth for decomposition. The first couple of feet is like the most important, the most nutrient. That's where our microbes and our fungi and our worms and all of our partners on this earth, they're there. And because of the natural decomposition and the settling of the earth, because you've now disturbed it, so we fluff up the earth when we dig it out, right? It's not as compact anymore. So then you add soil on top of that, which adds more of a smell barrier. So again, there's been no known cases of graves being dug up in the US. And another thing, it's a decomposing body, next to a water source, like that's definitely not safe. Well, there has been scientific research that has also shown that the contamination that they find in water has to do with the metal caskets and the embalming fluid more than it does with the actual bodies. So again, it's like some of those, myths that we just say because that's what we've been told. And of course, we want to believe, the people that are in our lives, But again, we don't know what we don't know until we know. And there's more and more research coming out all the time. So some of the other fears and myths are, is it sanitary to have a non-embalmed body? I'm also a home funeral educator, and some of the normal responses that I talk about, because of this is the precautions that you used in life, you will use in death. Most people don't die, from a communicable disease, although some do. But if you were wearing a mask and a gown to care for them, then you would wear a mask and a gown while you're caring for them in death as well. There's also other things that you can do. There is, as we all know, because of the pandemic, there's certain oils that are really good at being antibacterial, antimicrobial. So some of the more well-known ones are like, frankincense and myrrh, but there's also tea tree oil, and there's, lavender that people use. And, so you could wash the body, prepare the body. Vinegar is another good one, for that can be used for like drying up, areas on the body as well. Like there's different natural techniques, that we could use that make it just as safe, after death, for bodies who did not necessarily have a communicable disease, but it's still a concern. I remember the first time my son came running out of the forest with a feather, off of a wing of a dead bird or something. And it was like, oh my God, thank you so much. Here, let's, use some hand sanitizer, right? Because we also know that like that intrinsic fear of death. However, not only the World Health Organization, but the CDC, the pathogens that are involved in the decaying process of a body are not pathogenic. They're not pathogenic. That fear is intrinsic because all the time, whether it was influenza, whether it was, the Black Plague, whether it is that we don't know why you died and I don't want to die. So I'm not going to touch you. And it's just that habit. But again, the research that we have now says that the part of our bodies that are involved, the microorganisms, the bacterium with the decomposition are not pathogenic. Good, we are at almost 40 minutes, so it's perfect for you to take a screenshot. But again, this presentation is recorded and will be available to all of you to continue. But these are some of my favorites. Not on here. Oh, apparently I deleted without realizing it. Peaceful Passage at Home, which is the advocacy group that I belong to. Over on that table, I do have business cards on top of 33 questions, which I am a fan of learning how to have hard conversations. How do you have these conversations about death and dying with people? It is really difficult. And the place to start is by just asking any intimate questions, allowing someone to get vulnerable with you. And for you to get vulnerable with them is the beginning foundation of having hard conversations. So the cards are for free. You can take one if you want one. Our business card is on it as well. I kind of taped it on it. And like I said, it is a wonderful advocacy group. I love all the women that I am a part of with this group. And each of us has, different areas of where we like to do our work. Lisa Groves listed. She's the one that is the advocacy for helping people, teaching them or helping them, right? She'll take phone calls about how to go to your own personal municipal cemetery and help make those changes, that if they don't allow green burial, what you can do to kind of help that along, if it is something that you are interested in doing. The other thing, sorry people on Zoom, I can't really see you, but I guess this would be a good place for Q&A if anyone on Zoom has questions. Ooh, I'm not technologically good.
I think that means someone probably raised their hand.
Oh, is that someone raising their hand? Okay.
Yeah, hi. This is Jeff. Can you hear me?
I can, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay. So you had mentioned Jewish and Islamic burial practices. What I was wondering is if you're buried in a pine casket, you're not embalmed, but you're at a cemetery, buried in a grave, whatever, 3-6 feet deep. Is that considered a green burial?
So I want to make sure I heard you correctly. So did you say in a pine box?
A pine casket. The Jewish tradition, you were buried in a pine casket. And actually, there's a tradition too to have several holes bored in the bottom of it, again, so you return to the earth. But you're buried in a pine casket, and then in modern practice, in a grave, in a cemetery. And as you know, Jewish practice, you are not embalmed. And of course, you try to have the funeral as soon as possible after the death. So, but my question, I guess, is you're buried this way, would that be considered a green burial?
Absolutely. Yep. There's no vault. There's no embalming. It's biodegradable. Your container, whether it's a shroud or a pine box, as long as there's also no metal fittings. So it would need to be like dovetailed joints and things of that nature. So again, there's just keeping it to easily biodegradable. And typically, I do believe that they do not go 6 feet or under, which typically puts you into the water table area anyways, which is, worse. So the answer to your question is yes.
And just one quick follow-up, which is that I think some Jewish cemeteries, I think there's an ordinance where you have to have a vault because of I guess erosion, concerns with erosion. At that point, like you said, I guess it would no longer really be a green burial. Even, I mean, if it's a requirement of the cemetery, I guess, according to what you're saying, that is no longer really a green burial because you're using cement.
Sure. So while that is true, it is still a better, I would consider that more like a hybrid. You're doing the best you can with what you have. And even though the carbon footprint is now increased because of the vault, that there are reasons why cemeteries use vaults. So not only is it to keep, that they put people so close together that as they're digging somebody a hole, that it keeps, the casket next door from rolling in, right? So there are reasons. There's also like the, being able to mow the lawn, right? So they also use those vaults to keep all the land at the same height. So it makes it easier for them to mow. And, so there are reasons, why, but that is correct. It wouldn't be a green burial council green burial, by, their definition. However, it's still much better.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anybody else that has questions? Yeah.
My family tradition is cremation, but also I don't like the idea of being in an own spot that you have to pay for. And it seems the nature of green burial to me is that after a certain amount of time, you're gone, and the land should be able to be used again. I mean, there's no reason the land should be for one person. And first of all, I know there's a lot of natural gas used for cremation, which is not so good. But at least you don't have to buy land that will be dedicated to your decomposed body for eternity. So.
Sure. So there's two ways that people come at that. And one of them is absolutely for those of us who are well aware, that land issue is a huge issue. Cemeteries are starting to fill up and we don't have any more space for people. And it's like, and there's some school of thought around the fact that I've heard of one green cemetery that will reuse the space. However, taking into account that while your soft tissue, can be gone within a year or 2, 3, maybe depending on temperature, soil type, and things of that nature, that your bones take much longer, which is why we're finding bones from 300,000 years ago. So that there is that piece of it that people are trying to honor, that it takes longer, 15, 20 years, for bones to be reabsorbed. So that's another piece of why a lot of green cemeteries are like, this is it. And then there's the other school of thought. It's like, well, yeah, but now we're keeping this land in perpetuity. So this forest cannot be, messed with. Although we do know in our history that our government has taken over native lands and said, oh, so sorry, we're going to move your bones. Actually, you know what? We'll take them, put them in a museum.
We've done that with American land too. Like,
Yeah.
They take over a cemetery, move everybody from one. Because some business person wants to build something or a city does.
Yeah, that is true. So there are that. So I love the fact that, you're thinking about this as far as land conservation, and not wanting to just, take up land, however, like I said, different green burial cemeteries, do have different modes of thinking about why they're doing it this way. But I love that. Thank you.
So that leads to my next question. In terms of the 3 green burial cemeteries that you talked about in your presentation, do they all look the same? Do they all have the same sort of regulations or guidelines in terms of what that green burial is like?
So as far as I know, the answer to that question is absolutely not. And that there are different ones, you know, that have different criteria. I'm not like in every single, I haven't read every single, you know, requirements for each of the green burials. So that is definitely something, again, going back to that word greenwashing, right? They're like, oh, we're a green, you know, green cemetery, come on in, right? And then they use the vaults, you know, again, with reason. So again, it's where are you willing to, you know, give a little bit to have what it is that you want. And it's a win-win situation. So not only do you not have to be embalmed, which is like the biggest thing as far as I'm concerned, you know, then it's also like, and my family has, you know, this place that we can use. So it would be like what town you're in, where you would like to be buried, what state, you know, there is Will for the Woods is one of the first documentary movies that I had watched about green burial, Will for the Woods. And it is one gentleman's journey from diagnosis until internment. It's a wonderful movie. And there's a bunch of other movies that you can find. The Green Burial Council is a magnificent resource from staunch supporters and people who are much more educated than I am. I'm very passionate about this, you know, but they have a lot of learning behind all of them, you know, so Green Burial Council for sure would be another. And yes.
I'm curious about the work that's happening with funeral homes because I've only heard them offer cremation or burial in the traditional sense. And so wondering how to get them on board because I don't know, are they making less money if there's a green burial? I don't know, just because if cost cremation and green burial are about the same, then a family who tends to opt for a cremation because it's less expensive, how do we invite them when they may have wanted to have a space in a cemetery to go visit their loved one?
Mm-hmm.
And just, yeah.
That is a great question. I love that. One of the, again, going back to the Green Burial Council, they have an advocacy education program that not only educates cemeteries, but they also educate funeral homes. And they give what they call like their seal of approval, right, to funeral homes that are willing to work with families. So there's a couple of different ways of you know, coming at this. The first thing is most funeral homes would be happy to give the families what it is that they want. And I know like underneath there, don't you want the best for your mother? There is that we do want to give you what it is you want. You need to advocate for yourself. You need to be an educated consumer. Same as going into any doctor's office. Like you want to be educated about what it is that you're walking into, right? So the same thing with the funeral homes. You can call ahead of time. Some of them are much more willing to even work with people who want to have a home wake. I am, again, one of my other passions is home funerals for lots of different reasons. And there are funeral homes that are like, oh, absolutely. What would you like us to do? And then they do a la carte. We will transport the body for you. Oh, you need to keep it cold for a week before people come from out of state. Okay, you know, we'll charge you however much money a day. We'll keep it in cold storage for you. So you're not keeping it home with dry ice and Techni ice and all the things because, you know, just keeping the body cool, right? So there are ways to work with funeral homes, and for the most part, they do. You know what I mean? And do they lose money? They make money. If you walk away from them, they don't. So they're willing to work with you. You know, but again, not all funeral homes are educated. Not all people, you know, are educated about this either. You know, but when you look at it as a fact that, like, you're also saving their family. ALS, neurological diseases, leukemia, like keeping the embalming off of it also is good for them, whether or not they see it that way or not. And people don't really like change so easily or readily. It's hard to believe in sometimes. Does that kind of answer it for you? Or
Yeah, I'm just wondering how can we if we wanted to have this conversation with a family, then I would want the resources of like knowing which funeral home we could work with, or making sure that, you know, there are people there who are educated to be able to explain what the process is.
Absolutely. So again, the Green Burial Council are like the leading, but so is greenburialmass.org is another one. Green Burial Council, like I said, they have a seal of approval for funeral homes. But one of the things that they don't have is 2,000 people working with them, making these phone calls, going in to educate these funeral homes. So it really is like, this is, boots on the ground. We're boots on the ground. If this is something you really are passionate about, like me, it's like, here I am, doing this presentation, and this is how it happens, by each of us, wanting this or just even talking about it. You're going to have a conversation with someone today or tomorrow or next week that's going to plant the seed, and maybe they will call the Green Burial Council and be like, I'll make, 5 phone calls a week for you. What are your funeral homes that you would like phone calls made to? Like something like that. Like that's really where this kind of starts from. But if you work in Waltham, make a couple, go to the Green Burial Council website and see if Waltham is listed at, and has any funeral homes. And if not, on some Saturday when you're, folding clothes or something, speakerphone, make a couple of phone calls. But they also will teach you the questions to ask. You can get training through them as well, so that you can do it in a way that's, soft and inviting for the funeral homes to open up. And they are more and more, they are more willing now than ever before, because they see, the tide is changing. We don't want same old anymore. We don't want it just because it's always been. We want what's best for our future generations. And that's really what this is about. For me, anyways. Any other questions?
I think someone had their hand.
Oh, someone has their hand up in the virtual world. Hello. I'm sorry, I don't know how to use the computer to unmute you. You
Sorry,
have to unmute.
I got it. Yep.
Oh, wonderful.
This is Jeannie. Are there sources for financial support for people who want to choose this option? And sometimes, so I'm in bereavement, so sometimes a family member will become very aware of the fragility of life and, I'm going to go sometime soon too, or somebody else in our family. It's expensive, right? The whole process is expensive. Are there people who are passionate about green burial and are creating, grant funded financial support?
Thank you so much for asking that question. And I wish I had an answer. I love that, right? Why not? The same thing about, the Humane Society, right? That they're run by support. So you just may have seeded some future, wonderful support for future people. So thank you for that question. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that.
Okay, thank you.
That was good question. Yeah. Anybody else?
I just wanted to share, we had a patient, and they did this. They used the West Roxbury cemetery, but I'm looking at the pictures that the husband sent me now. Like the group, the really close people, they built the bear, it's called. I guess that's like the something. And it was beautiful. They had all these flowers, and then they all went and did it together. Had Prosecco in the cemetery and put her in the ground, and it was a really nice experience for them, and so fitting for who they were. But they used the West Roxbury.
Thank you for sharing that. That right there, brings up so much emotion, because that's one of the reasons why I advocate for home funerals, is bringing back those rituals. We are so disconnected. We don't even want to talk about death, let alone being able to have conversations, with intimately, with family. But that's part of why I advocate for home funerals, is bringing those rituals back, deeply connecting ourselves, being present, and the celebration. One of my most beloved books, The Smell of Grief. No, The Smell of Right. Martin Patel, The Smell of Grief, The Smell of Rain on Dirt, or the Smell of Rain on Dirt. And it's a book, a grief book. One of the things that he says in his book is grief is nothing but praise. Grief is praise. Praise for life, for love, well lived, for connection. Like that is what it is. And these rituals bring us back to that and connect us back into. Also, one of the reasons why I think we don't like to do it is because every other stored grief that was never processed or held comes up. You know, it's like you hear it in funerals. Why is she crying? She didn't really know him that well. Like, I don't know. Oh, she's crying. Someone take her outside. Well, where's your grief belong? It doesn't have a place to belong except for in these ceremonies. So I'm another advocate for like these ceremonies are also for us. Yeah, they're for us. Yeah.
I found the title, The Smell of Rain on Dust.
Oh, thank you. Yes, Smell of Rain on Dust. Thank you. Amazing book in all the ways. Amazing book. Any other questions in cyber world?
To wrap it up, Kathleen.
We do. Okay. So thank you, people in cyber world. I appreciate you and your willingness to listen. So for those of you who want to, with the 5 minutes that we have, I did bring a shroud so that if people had never seen one and would like to see one, that I could show you the shroud that I have. It's a friend makes them. It's called the Last Dance Shroud. And she usually uses recycled materials, which is another like boom for her, right? So if for those of you who want to, you can stay and I will go over there and kind of show you about the shroud. Thank you very much, and I appreciate all of you.